And now, it's time for TJwow.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, or good afternoon, or even good evening, depending on whereabouts you are in the world. You know me. I'm Jo. I'm the Deputy Editor of TJ. I am your host today on our TJwow webinar, as always. If you've been before, you know we love a bit of a chat. We know we love the conversation. And it's all about, I think, kind of getting together, sharing what we know, asking great questions of our speakers, of each other, sharing stuff in that chat window, and really making sure we can make the most of our time together. So you've got that chat window. Please do get to use that, so you can ask questions of each other anytime you like. If you've got things to share, maybe something you've read recently, something that you've written recently, a video you've watched, whatever it might be, please do go and share that in the chat window. It would be absolutely great to share all of those different things. I've also shared a note there on how to get your Twitter name up, if that's what you'd like to do. And we've got the question pod that you can use. You can go and type your question in there. I promise we will see them and make sure we try and address them as best we can. Also, what we've got, if you want to speak, some of you, we've got your microphone tested beforehand, so Ian, Laura and Frank especially. If you're thinking, actually, I've got something to say on this, or I'd like to say something, we want to get you involved too. So you can just raise your hand anytime you like and we'll get you involved. And if you're on Twitter, well, you can join us with John, our editor, and he's going to be tweeting away in the background, so please share your thoughts, your comments, and let's get going on there. So good morning if you're just joining us. Love that you're here now. All of our Training Journal webinars are recorded, as you know, on our Training Journal website. Let's see who we've got going on today. Here we go. You can see we've got Janet, we have Abby, we have Stephen, and we're looking forward to a great discussion with them. So good morning, everybody from around the world. I can see some people that have joined us and some names I know and some names I don't know, so welcome, everybody. Let's get our speakers on screen because, quite frankly, you've had enough of me by now, I'm sure. So we're going to get our speakers here. Let's get our videos up and running. So welcome, good morning everybody, thanks for coming along. And what we're going to do is just do some brief introductions so that we know who our speakers are and what they do for what company. And then we'll jump into the topic after that. So let's start with, let's go ladies first and be old-fashioned. Let's start with Janet, then Abby, then Steve, and just find out a little bit more about what they do. So Janet, tell us what it is that you do. And Janet, let's get you unmuted first of all. There you go. You've made a mistake once now. You'll not make it for the whole rest of the session. Pause right at the beginning. So we'll just stop your webcam, Janet, try it again, and we'll come back to you and see if that's working in a moment. Oh gosh, so brilliant, thank you. And I was going to say, with that kind of background, no challenges there then. Goodness me. Gosh, okay. Well, thank you for that. So as you can see, we're just having a bit of trouble with our video, but that's why we have our speakers there. So let's try getting our video on screen again and check that that's working for everybody. So I know Steve is going to get his video running again in just a moment. It looks to me like they might still be frozen, so we'll see how they go. And you let us know in the chat window how the video is for you. Abby, do we have you on audio yet? Is that working? I don't think that is working for Abby. No. So Abby, we still can't hear you. Do you know what, guys? We do so much work behind the scenes on testing everything. You won't believe we test everything beforehand, we do it on the morning, and then it just goes and crashes. Okay, so all frozen. Let's remove those video cameras for now. We'll come back to video cameras in just a moment, and we'll see what we can do to help Abby out as well. So we will come back to Abby and see what we can do. In the meantime, brilliant. Thank you very much for sharing those. Abby, do we have you back? Just see if that's working.
Yes, Joe. Any luck now?
Hooray! We have you back. Okay, so let's let everybody have a digest what Stephen thought there. We will come back to those points, and I can see some stuff going on in the chat window we'll come back to. In the meantime, let's have an introduction with Abby, and let's see if our video is working a bit better. So let's try that again. So let's hear from Abby, and we'll come back to our conversation in a moment. So Abby, what is it that you do, and now that we can hear you?
Great. Thanks, Joe. So my name is Abby, and I'm a Client Services Director at Marva Multimedia. Now, Marva is a video production company, and we specialize in everything that has to do with video delivery content, such as video animation, corporate videos, explainer videos, and so on and so forth. So the clients we work with typically are within the learning and development space, marketing, sales, and internal communications. So in a summary, Marva obviously works with clients to ensure that we understand any sort of strategies you have around delivering communication via video. Obviously, everyone knows video is going viral now, and many corporate organizations are then bearing towards that route. So that's what Marva Multimedia do. In terms of teamwork, I lead a team of specialists within various different departments, i.e. sales, marketing, and operations. And typically, our responsibility is to ensure that we understand what the client's requirements are and deliver those requirements based on whatever feedback we get from them.
Thank you, Abby. Really glad that we've actually had that introduction. I've shared your details, I've shared Steve's details, which I didn't get to do before because I was working behind the scenes on that. So thank you very much for that, Abby. Now, we were just discussing that opening question of, well, what does get in the way of teams working well? And quite rightly, we've got kind of technology, but also Steve mentioned agile teamwork and just being responsive and behaviour. And in the chat window, quite a few different comments. Remoteness needs extra attention, says Neil. Lorna says technology is never the enabler, which is the mistake often made. And Steve has put in the chat, actually, we mustn't be seduced by the technology. So we've got quite a few different things going on there. So let's come to Janet and then to Abby. Janet, what are your thoughts on that opening question? What for you gets in the way of teams working well? Yeah, I think that's a really important point about what we're afraid of and then how we behave under those circumstances, because we don't always behave our best self. I'll hold my hand up to that. I know that, which isn't always pleasant. And Abby, what are your opening thoughts on what gets in the way of teams working well?
I mean, just to echo on what Janet just mentioned, again, it's all around, you have personalities to deal with, you've got skills and experiences to deal with as well, and also working ethics is something that I think is very important. Now, from my standpoint, it's a two-edged sword in terms of you as a manager, understanding and knowing how you want to lead that team. And bearing in mind, you're working with an organization whereby you have certain mission statements and ethos in terms of how you kind of present yourself to your clients. And then on the other side of that is the case whereby you need to work with people with different skills. And then you have to deal with different personalities. You have to deal with how you respond to people in different ways. So yes, those are the three things I think are quite crucial in terms of,
Oh gosh, yes, and there's so many varieties almost, of ways of working with people and different personalities and the challenges that they come up with. So you've got some really interesting points there, Abby. And Steve is chatting away in the chat window and answering Frank Halberg's question about giving an example of agility. And Steve shares that actually there's team agility, there's individual agility, and we have different behaviours. So Steve, tell us about different behaviours face to face and online. Thank you, Stephen. I think there's some really interesting points there. There's a congruency I see between the role of the manager and actually the role of learning and development in that information overload, in what learning and development would call curating perhaps information and giving that context. But also there's a similar role for the manager, I think, in an organizational context or a business context. About what you mean. So Abby, let's come to you about work ethics. Can you share a bit more about that? Yes, carry on. Okay, interesting. Thank you, Abby. So it's all about reflecting on those kind of things differently. So do let us know in the chat window, do you agree with that? Do you disagree with it? Do you have experiences of it? Do you have a follow-up question? We've got that chat window. We also have our question and answer pod. So in the chat window, first of all, Frank says, thanks for the feedback. Melanie says, won't each team have its own culture based on the personalities within it? Abby, quickly on that one before we move on to our next question. Is that an obvious yes, or is that different depending on the organisation, do you think? Yeah. I think that yes and no is always the best answer to everything. The team is too big. Do you agree that teams should be as small as possible? So maybe that depends on how hungry and greedy people are. But Janet, what do you think about that? I know when I advise people about, for instance, virtual classrooms, I always say 8 to 10 people maximum. Any more than that, and it's a webinar. And I think it's the same thing. It's about that one-to-one interaction, that kind of conversation that you can have. Steve, are you in agreement that small teams are better, or are there exceptions, or can you manage that in different ways, maybe? Oh, really interesting. Thank you. And in the chat window, Neil Gavin is saying, in a previous role, I had a team supervisor between me and the rest of the team. They filtered and restricted the team's access to me and my access to them. I had to have the post reevaluated and downgraded. So tell us a bit more about that in chat, Neil. I'm assuming from the way that you said that actually that was a bottleneck and it was a barrier rather than actually a positive of reducing that information overload. But Niall, also, Lorna says in the chat window that one is one of the problems that most managers are player managers. Now, I actually don't necessarily know what you mean by that, Lorna, and I'm sure Lorna will kind of explain some more in a moment. But it's Abby with managing the teams.
Teams working together, as well as the fact that that can also have impact in limiting the sort of interaction or synergy within teams.
There you go. That'll be that mute button again. Oh, you wouldn't believe I do this for a living, would you, everybody? Never mind. Thank you, everybody. There you go. I thought I'd muted when I was typing, and oh dear, near me, that mute button is so naughty. I'm sure it's not me. I was just saying thank you, Abby. I think it can be so challenging. You know, there's so many different aspects to teams and people and behaviours and the skills and strengths and weaknesses that we have. Earlier on asked about kind of increasing transparency and openness, and what can we do to increase our trust? And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I watched a Netflix film last night called The Circle, where they were saying, oh, openness and trust and everything like that is amazing. But then at what point do you draw that line where it's just too much? So let's come to Steve first, then Janet. Steve, thoughts on kind of increasing openness and transparency and trust in a team?
Absolutely. I was just typing away, so it's a good thing you kind of stopped me there. Joe, can you hear me? Okay, so in terms of work ethic, I think what I was kind of alluding to was the organization's culture. So every organization has a culture in place. The previous company I worked for, it was all about working together. It's about having the right people with the right skills doing the right jobs. Secondly, that ethic also applies when you deal
Thank
with
you,
your
Steve,
clients.
and some lovely comments
As
coming
you
through
have
in the
it.
chat window and
And
all
also,
sorts
I
of stuff,
think it's also
including
important that
Melanie says
when you
about a
work
Judith
within a
Glazer
team,
or
you kind of
book,
need
so
to
that looks
reflect that in
really
every single
informative as
department in
well.
terms of
Thank you.
how
And
you work
Frank saying
together
thank you,
collectively
Steve. I
and
like
create
the
that
focus
synergy
on
within
emotions.
various
Let's come
different
to Janet
departments
then,
within the
Abby, on this one.
organization,
Janet,
and also
thoughts
how you
about
kind
kind
of
of
have that,
openness, trust, and
I'll
building
say,
that
a
in
combination of
teams?
talents whereby you then position that to your clients and they can see that, you know, the ethic and the culture with which you work together within the organization reflects on how you deliver your product or your services. I mean, I can only answer that question based on my experience. And typically, the culture is company-wide. And yes, the way individuals adapt to that culture is also dependent on their personalities. So it's a yes and a no. But then again, ultimately, the ultimate goal is we've set 3 cultures up. We've got this ethos, which we present to our clients. But then you, as an individual working within the organization, need to
that's not a
reflect those
great thing,
ethos
and I
based
did
on
feel
your
bad.
personality.
But then she went
So again,
into great manager mode.
it's not a
Of like
yes or a no
she didn't take
answer.
over, but she kind of stepped
They kind
in.
of
She
work together.
supported. She went and liaised with the senior manager where it was impacting. And I learned a lot from that, even though in other ways I didn't necessarily think she was the greatest person in the world. There are certain different techniques you can learn from that, and that kind of behaving as the mature manager that she should have been was absolutely great. So thank you for that, Janet. And what have we got from Abby around trust and openness from your experience of managing teams?
Thank you, Joe. I'm not sure if it was a question or a statement, but I'll join in. In terms of that whole area of trust, I think that for me, intention and impact is a big dilemma for team leaders, team managers, in terms of what is their intention and actually what is their impact. Whether that be from a technology point of view, whether that be from a
That's great, Abby, and I think if you're leading with
sort
that,
of
it
point
really
of view.
fosters that amongst the
Those
whole team, then, doesn't
misunderstandings
it?
that
Which is
creep
really
in,
important.
and I think that
Brilliant.
that can get in the
And I
way
know Neil was
and
referencing
damage
something
the trust,
Victoria's been saying in the chat
if
about
you
the
like,
danger of
as
groupthink
well
in
as then
smaller
working,
teams.
if
But
you
what you're
can,
describing,
working
I
in the
guess, is the
corporate
opposite of
world
that. The
and
positive of the team
establishing
working together.
your
So that's really
team,
great.
let's say,
And
and then
Ian,
email
let's come to you on
exchanges
the
or
microphone.
notices
We
come
we
out which
tested
seem
your
to be
microphone
quite
before the
contrary to a
session started. So
conversation. So I
if you're
think that
okay with
there's
it,
a
Ian,
real
let's get you
tension that
unmuted and just see what
leaders
you
have
think
with that.
about the kind of openness in teams, because you work a lot with teams as well.
You're welcome.
Absolutely, Ian. I think there's always a point where, the team leader has to say one thing but maybe knows something else. That can cause that tension in all sorts of different ways. And Neil says, I love the intent versus impact concept. That's how you came over. Is that what you meant? And I know sometimes I have to look at things and go, right, let's breathe and relax. What did they actually mean? Is it coming from a good place? So thank you, Ian, for sharing that with us. Thank you very much. So let's turn to another question. We're going to come to Abby first, then Steve, then Janet on this one. So Frank asked in the question and answer pod a particular question, but also we've had quite a few comments on this in the chat window as we've been going through. So Frank.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Sure, if
Joe.
that's
So
pronounced
obviously,
properly.
currently,
Any person
I
can
lead a
propose an
small
idea,
team,
and if it's voted
quite
a
a
winner, then that
close-knitted sort of
person becomes
relationship
the
that we
team
have.
leader.
So
The
everyone
team manages
understands where each
itself
other
and is responsible for the
needs to work
profit or
together,
loss of
as
the
well as
project.
understanding
So
the
what are our
skills and the
thoughts on
mindset
this? And
of each
Lorraine in the
individual.
chat window earlier
Now, in
on
my
said
previous role,
about,
where I
we
had a
can
larger
lead for
team
ourselves and
of
encourage
over
shared
25
leadership. And
individuals,
Marco, I think, was a bit tongue in
yes, there
cheek
were
for saying,
limitations in
yes,
terms of people
whatever
feeling they
happened
were
to
not part of the
self-managing?
team and they were just another, mind my French, another bum on the seat. But ultimately, I think it's crucial when global organizations have big teams. There has to be certain hierarchies, like Steve rightfully said, in terms of kind of having those little bottlenecks dotted line into the main line manager, and that can certainly cause issues in terms of how employees or colleagues work together. So I would say if you get the formula right with big organizations, managing a large team could work, but then ultimately smaller teams obviously is easier because you have their FaceTime and they're right in front of you. You can communicate with them. They have your time. You can dedicate that sort of one-to-one interaction with them. But then with the bigger teams, obviously there's number of layers, a number of, again, depends on the organization how
around about maybe taking responsibility. Is it about kind of being able to be in touch with management further up and seeing broader things across the business? Is that the reason why somebody has to do that, or is it something else?
They choose to manage the team itself. But yes, just to echo back on what Janet and Steve have said, smaller teams are better to manage, but then you also need to think about the efficiency in terms of how much time you spend working with those teams because you have such a close knitted sort of team structure in place. So that would be my thoughts in terms of bigger teams or smaller teams within the organization. Sorry. Oh, Jill, we can't hear you.
Thank you for clarifying that, Abby. And what we're really seeing, there's so much diversity in how we can run and manage our teams is really important. Steve, let's come to you for your thoughts on this one about can any person be a team leader and manage and propose that idea? Can we have self-managed teams? Thank you. I think it's a great point, and Marco picks up on that in the chat window. It says, I run a virtual team, and one of the behaviours I try and instill is to go and have a look up. Thank you very much. And let's come to Janet on this, and maybe we'll come to Frank Kalberg before we go. Teams idea.
Thanks, Joe. Well, what comes into my mind is for example, the fantastic work Gary Hamel and his colleagues have been doing on bureaucracy. And as I understand it, their research shows that we're going into overdrive on bureaucracy. I mean, we're wasting so much time and money and not getting the results we need because of this bureaucracy, and that's having an effect on teams, how teams work. So that's my initial thoughts there.
I think that makes a great point, actually. There's all sorts of different examples I can think of around the caring and the impact that makes as a team manager or team leader and supervisor. And there's loads of stuff going on in the chat window for our speakers and for each other, so thank you very much for those. Frank, let's come to you and get you to unmute your microphone. You're the person that asked the question. What are your thoughts on this before we go into our reflection?
I think for me, the two things that are ultimately important is empowering the people you work with, giving them the ability to be able to make those informed decisions themselves. And also, ultimately, I think one thing that's crucial is building that trust whereby you can let them get on and do their jobs. I'm not one of...
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I think we've all had those experiences where we're banging our head against the brick wall going, why does it have to be done this way? Why isn't there someone here to sign it off? Why does everything grind to a halt when we're on holiday? Why do I have to fill in things 38,000 times in triplicate and so on and so forth? And Steve is saying more trust. Yeah.
By themselves, obviously with your...
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to come off of webcam. We're staying here. We've got some reflection to do. But we're going to say goodbye to webcam. So let's just wave goodbye to our speakers if you can still see them. And we're going to come into some reflection for the end of our session. So it's really important that we actually think about what we're going to do. Even more important than that is let's practice with the T-text tool. So let's have a quick practice first. So go and grab your pencil tool, please. It's the one that marks T. Now, if you are on a mobile device, the person's logged off who was on mobile, it will be different. grab the
with
T
challenges
text tool. So
collectively.
you've got it on the
At
left
the end
of
of the
your
day,
screen.
yes,
I
we
just
are
got a picture
individual
there.
government
And just
organizations,
type
but we
in
are also a
maybe
team.
your name
So,
or
you know, it's
maybe
not a
hello.
case of...
Now you can't see that I've written hello, but if I click, I reveal my writing and everyone can see it. So let's go and try that out. So go and type in your name, or as Neil has done, your Twitter handle. That's a good one too. So use that T-text tool and just share, you know, we've had a great discussion today, loads of stuff been shared. What is it that I'm going to do after this? Don't worry if you've written on top of someone else, you can just move your writing out of the way. So right at the bottom, Melanie Inspire says, write a coaching newsletter on this to consolidate my thinking and share ideas with my clients. Melanie, that is a brilliant idea. And if you or anyone else would like to write an opinion piece or a little blog post for TJ reflecting on this, we would love to have your ideas and share it on the Training Journal website. You can just get in contact with us through, through Twitter if you want to on Training Journal. You can contact me. You can go through to the website if you want to and find our contact details. John is probably the best person to go and speak to, and you can find his details on the website, but you can chat to me as well if you want to. What else have we got as action points on our whiteboard today? Go and check out the company Morning Star. Yes, so thank you for sharing that. I'm going to consider whether I behave differently online versus face-to-face. Good point. For virtual teams, I think it's important to listen in 3D. What is said, what is not said, the way something is said, and what media is used to communicate. So, Steve, that's a really interesting one. Let's come to you on that, Steve. What do you think about that? Because that kind of multimedia listening probably kind of resonates quite a lot with some of the stuff that you've seen.
Yes, can I just check that you can hear me, because
Yes.
my microphone became disconnected. Yeah, okay. I think in virtual teams, because we've got multiple media channels to communicate, it's very easy to listen quickly and in an assuming way to those people that are most visible or extroverted in a virtual team. One of the problems with virtual teams is that introverts, who often are extremely thoughtful and reflective and incisive, can almost become invisible. So I'm often interested when people when people don't necessarily contribute as overtly as I might like, for example, what is not being said, and I might need to listen to that person in a one-to-one conversation rather than in a group discussion. The other thing is that when you're working virtually, I think often when you try to say something quite subtle, it can very easily be taken the wrong way. So the tone in which something is said, maybe the things that people preface what they're about to say, is really quite important in terms of the emotional well-being of the team, the psychological safety of the team in that respect. So there's just a few sort of thoughts I have around that.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. And Neil sharing a great idea in the chat window as well on that kind of point. And back on the whiteboard, gosh, there's loads of things that you've got here. And I'll just run through just a couple more. Just things like checking for understanding, check out the Susan David book. We'll think about how I can be the best team member I can be in the multiple teams that I belong to. Focusing on getting to know my team. See, the trust aspect has been discussed, so sorry if you missed on that. All of our recordings are available online. You can go and find that out, so don't worry if you missed some of that. What else have we got? More to do around teams, technology type, lead by example. Don't press refresh in the middle of a session. Oh, well, at least you're learning something. That's a good thing. You've learned something. That's good. Look at the organizational culture versus team culture, stakeholder representation. Oh, that's a good one from John. Try rotating the team leader badge more often. That's an interesting point. You can lead a horse to water, but a pencil must be lead. Thank you. So some really good points there. Let's come to our speakers for just a final comment and thought on today. And Debbie Carter, our editor-in-chief at TJ, she's here today. So in the chat window, Debbie, if you think your microphone's working and you'd like a final comment as well, let me know. If not, no problem. So Abby, let's come to you first for just a really quick, short, final thought on what we've discussed today. So Abby, you're unmuted. Come back to Abby in just a moment. So let's try with Janet instead. So Janet, any final thoughts on today?
I think one of the things that has come out for me quite strongly this morning is about the context within which you are working, and so many factors will affect how well that team works. So the maturity of a team, whether you're working virtually, whether you are a large team or a small team, whether what you're working on is very clear for everybody to understand, or whether it's more nebulous than that, and the impact of different people's personalities affecting that. And that's an awful lot for a manager or a leader to be able to get their head around. It's a massive complicated web of it's like a tapestry, and managers, leaders, supervisors, whatever, need to understand that they will not get it right from day one, and that's okay. The culture has to allow them to fail and support them through that, I think.
Brilliant, Janet. Thank you very much. And Abby, let's see if your microphone's working now.
I believe it is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it is. Sorry we've had a few technical problems, Abby, but what are your final thoughts?
I mean, for me, ultimately, in terms of, working together and the factors that kind of impact how successful that is, going on to what Jenna just said, you have to deal with people's personalities, people's skills, the way they like to be managed, the way you like to be managed. But ultimately, it boils down to the ethos and the culture within the organization and how that applies to individuals on a day-to-day basis in terms of how they work with each other. Secondly, is also as leaders is to create that ownership within your team. And by doing that, it obviously is beneficial to the business because they feel that they have that sense of ownership where they feel they belong, where they feel, they're being heard, where they feel that you're taking, their advice, their thoughts or feedback, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, many organizations, mostly corporate organizations, are going into this digital transformation phase whereby employees are allowed to work from home like we're doing right now. I mean, I'm working from home at the moment. But then you also need to kind of understand that when you go through that phase and you have employees that then have to do their jobs from wherever they are, you need to create that sort of openness and trust in terms of how you work with the virtual team, giving that responsibility, knowing that they're doing the right jobs and not, taking out time to doing other things other than, what they're assigned to do within the specific working hours. So for me, I think the most important thing, again, with virtual teams is how do you leverage technology? I know Steve touched on certain things like you work with a virtual team, it's not engaging enough, people feel left out. What organizations doing to kind of tie that sort of disconnect? What sort of technology are you using? Are you using video? I mean, we have a webinar today, you launch your cameras. Can you have a team meeting where everyone is engaged without having to put everybody into, a meeting room in the office? So those are sort of the 4 areas where I think, from my standpoint, in terms of driving down the road where you want to have a more effective team and you want to have that sort of synergy around how you work together collectively. Those are the 4 areas that I personally think is crucial.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Abby. Glad we got your final thoughts in there. And Steve, very quickly, what's your final thought on the session and the topics today?
Well, first of all, how much I've enjoyed it and really enjoyed all the collective contributions from everybody. Really, really interesting. I think with virtual teams, be disciplined about the little things and the big things will sort themselves out. And I think particularly, again, with virtual teams, be inclusive, create a culture of inclusion. And that can be a little uncomfortable sometimes in a more culturally diverse team, but but create a culture where everybody feels comfortable to say what they really want to say.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers, Janet, Abby and Stephen. They've done an absolutely brilliant job. So a huge round of applause. We had a couple of technical problems at the beginning, but they did absolutely brilliant. Debbie Carter, our training journal editor-in-chief, says a great variety of ideas. For me, context and the maturity of individuals is key to success. So thank you very much, everybody. You've got some links down at the bottom of the screen. You can just click on those and click browse to. So you know that the the webinar session is recorded and it will be available to you. By now, you know we're on Twitter at #TJwow, and you can continue the discussion there, and on our forum if you want to. As for our next webinars, well, on 8th of August, why is the world still obsessed with e-learning? We chat to Jennifer and Fiona and one more speaker I'm just lining up as well. And then in September, we're looking at the business skills that we need for the savvy L&D professional. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along. Thank you very much for our speakers, obviously. Thank you to John for tweeting, for Debbie as well for her wise words, and thank you to all of you guys that always contribute and share and ask so much, absolutely brilliantly. We are so proud of our little training journal team that we have here, and I include all of you in that. So thank you, everybody. Goodbye, and hope to see you on the next